Since 2001, Americans have spent thousands of lives and trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Pakistan, and a whole bunch of other countries. Hard to find a single person who believes America is richer or happier as a result, or the world more stable. Not surprisingly, Americans are not enthusiastic for more foreign wars, so now Washington is just conducting them without telling you anything about it. It's happening in Syria. You probably didn't know about it because it wasn't reported much. Some White House personnel thing took precedence, but last night, the U.S. conducted airstrikes on Syrian government forces and said it was in response to an attack on U.S.-based forces. Without much of a debate, we appear to be sucked into another war in Syria. Michael Walz is a Republican candidate for Congress in Florida. He was a senior advisor for counterterrorism to Vice President Dick Cheney, and he joins us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Tucker.
So I realize these things are really complicated. That's the nature of them.
Yeah.
And they're, upsides and downsides. But if you take 3 steps back, life expectancy in the United States just went down, reported today for the 2nd year in a row. A lot of hurting people in this country. Right. How does getting involved in a war in Syria, and we're involved in a war in Syria, help Americans in any way?
Well, Tucker, first I think we need to take a step back and kind of go macro to micro. And, the world has enjoyed its longest period of prosperity post-World War II, led by the United States, defended by the United States military. The system that I think we often take for granted of relatively free trade, of democratic values, of individual liberty. Not all countries are perfect, but the United States has to lead. So in this case, and specifically, I think what we saw in the last 8 years, particularly in the Middle East, is what happens when we have a commander-in-chief, in this case, President Obama, who decides, the United States' engagement abroad does more harm than good, doesn't help the United States, and let's withdraw American leadership. And we saw that when President Obama backed out of Iraq, and he almost backed out of Afghanistan.
I got to interrupt you because
we saw the rise of ISIS.
Your platitudes. Hold on, I'm sorry. Yeah. I agree with everything you said. America is the best. Our leadership has been critical to global prosperity. I agree with that. Obama was bad.
Well, that's how it benefits the United States, though.
I agree, but I'm talking about specifically. We are now in a shooting war in Syria, which has had the worst civil war in the world in the last few years, and I want to know how specifically that benefits America. I think it's a fair question given the recent past.
Well, I think, let's look at what's happened in Europe the last 4 or 5 years coming out of Syria, and then what's happened in the United States. We had the rise of ISIS in the wake of Obama's withdrawal from Iraq. President Trump has led a strategy to defeat ISIS as a state. It's not defeated as a movement, but it is defeated as a state, and it's not a surprise that a lot of those attacks in Europe have slowed down, if not stopped. And a lot of the inspiration in the United States, whether it's San Bernardino or Orlando or other places, have also stopped. So I think Americans are safer as a result of President Trump's strategy to take ISIS down. And now the key piece
and of course that was, but
and the key piece is what do we do in the aftermath? And that's going to be incredibly difficult and complicated.
But what's so confusing is, I agree with everything you said once again, but it doesn't get to the question I asked, which is, you've got Bashar al-Assad, who's obviously a dictator, but he was against ISIS too. And now we're fighting him? It seems demented to me, and I bet you if you polled most Americans, they would agree with me.
Well, what I think the administration is doing now, and what President Trump is doing now, is shifting from ISIS to Iran. And Russia is heavily involved. And there's a lot of people, I think, rightly asking, why not just let the Russians take care of it? Well, I'll tell you a couple of reasons. One, the Russians don't care about ISIS. They care about defending Assad. Two, they're aligned with Iran, and Iran has made more gains in the last decade under the Obama administration in terms of advancing its hegemony, which is not in the United States' interest or Israel's interest, than they've made in the last 1,000 years. And three, I'll quote a former NATO commander who said the Russians have weaponized refugees, piled them into Europe, allowed ISIS to infiltrate, and have done more to destabilize our partners in Europe than the Warsaw Pact ever did. So I think all of those things, Tucker, are in our interest.
With respect, that's just pure propaganda, in my opinion. The Russia and Iran are bad. I'm not defending them, but they didn't do that. I mean, as you know. Anyway, I wish we had more time. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right. Thanks.